Quilting has been around for centuries, long before fancy quilt setups and high-tech machines. It was a simple tradition to gather around a quilt, talking, chatting, sharing stories, and creating something beautiful and practical. Now it kind of feels like quilting is an expensive hobby with fancy machines and expensive fabric. The truth is, you don't need a fancy long arm machine or an expensive setup to enjoy this timeless craft. I'm Jan Howell. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm all about bringing you tips and ways to make all of your DIY projects easier, a little more simple, and less frustrating. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can make your own quilting frames. It's simple and a great way to bring back the joy of hand quilting. I have very fond memories of playing under a quilt as a child while it was being stitched. It was just like this colorful tent above me. Those were moments filled with creativity, warmth, and connection. These frames are easy to set up and store. You can use them to tie or hand stitch a quilt. Don't worry about the quilt in progress taking up all your living room space. Small quilts can be taken off the stands and leaned against the wall out of the way. I am so shocked that so many crafters have not even seen this technique or know what a quilting frame or stand is. It's a lost art that I want to bring back. Trust me, once you make a quilt this way, you'll be addicted. This is part one of a DIY quilter series that I think you're really going to like. So whether you're new to quilting or you're looking for a way to connect with loved ones and friends on a simple sewing project, this is a good place to start. So without any further ado, let's get started. I'm going to get down on the floor and we're going to go over the materials and items that you'll need. There are several different methods of attaching the quilt fabric to the frames. Now, I used to use tacks, and that's what my grandmother used and my mom used, are these big tacks. And I even showed you in a previous tutorial how to use those tacks. But I have found a way that is a lot better, I think, and simpler, and it's more permanent. And you're not losing all those tacks everywhere. I really like it. So instead of tacking the fabric to the frame, with this method, you pin the quilt to some fabric strips that have been nailed or stapled to the wood frame. So you're going to need some strips of fabric. Now these strips of fabric, they're going to be long. You want them as long as your board, or maybe we're going to cut them down just a little bit smaller or shorter. But you don't want to piece two fabric pieces together. You don't want to have a seam. So you don't want to buy all that yardage. So I find a nice quality upcycled sheet works well. Now if you're using the 8-foot boards, I found that a queen or a king size sheet worked. And you want to get a high thread count so it's really tightly woven. I usually save a few sheets when I'm done with them, just because they come in handy for painting as a drop cloth and for making tags and other projects like this. Now you're going to cut the sheets into 6-inch strips, and then you'll fold them in half and press this edge really well, so you can press it all out, and then you'll fold it again. So it's about 2 inches, and you have these raw edges folded up, and then we're going to staple them on the board. For the frames, you'll need to get some boards. The sign at the hardware store will say 3x1s, but my husband said they're actually only 2.5 by 3/4 inches. So that's what you'll buy, is the 3x1 boards. And you'll want to get them the length that you want, and I recommend getting an 8-foot board set if you plan on making quilts that are like a lap quilt, or it's just a good varying size that you could even make with a baby quilt. But if you're going to be just making a lot of small quilts, then I would get some 5-foot boards, 6-foot boards, and you can even get a 7-foot board, or you can combine the two sizes together. Now when you're picking the boards, you'll want to find boards, and you might have to go through a lot of boards to find some good ones. Just depends on your store. I know we had to go through several to get a decent, straight, unwarped board. You want to get boards that don't have very many knots in it, and of course, big knots that are affecting the shape of the board. So if you take the board and you look down it, you can usually see if it's straight or not. You'll be surprised at how bendy and warped some of these boards are. So you'll want to choose 4 boards, and then when you come home, cut them down to the size you want. And you'll need to sand all edges so there aren't any slivers, and they're nice and smooth. You can use a hand sander, or you can just use a piece of sandpaper. For the first pass, you want to use like an 80 to 110 grit, which is a little bit more coarse, and that's going to knock off all the rough edges. And then for the final pass, use a 240 grit to get it nice and smooth. Then you'll want to wipe all the boards down, all the edges, with a damp cloth to remove any dust or particles left on the boards. You're going to need a measuring tape or some kind of measuring device. And you're going to need a staple gun or these carpet or upholstery tacks. I find that a 6 by 1/2 inch are a good tack to use, and a hammer if you are applying the tacks or the nails. And if you are going to use a staple gun, you'll need to I like my electric staple gun, and it has 5/16 inch staples in it right now. So I have 4 strips that have been pressed. Now let me show you how to apply them to the board. Here is the folded edge, and here is the raw edge folded over. I'm going to flip that over and place that along the edge. And there'll be a little gap on this folded edge, and we're going to nail it down on this cut edge. So I hope that makes sense. That's flush with the board, or maybe even in just a little bit, and we're going to nail. And we're going to nail it about every 3 inches. And see, that will be just flapping around. All right? So I'm going to find the end of the board and place that down about 2 to 3 inches. You don't want to bring it all the way to the end. Let's bring it down about a couple inches. Line up that edge. You'll put another one in. And if it's kind of raised off the surface a little bit, you can take your hammer and just hammer that in so it's nice and flush. All right. Now let me just show you what it would look like with the tacks. So these little tacks look like that. And the same thing, you would have them be just about 3 inches away. And you'd just hammer that. And do that all the way down the board and for each board. So it's going to look like that. All right. So a few things that you'll want to get so you can be prepared for the next video where I'll show you how to put your quilt on the frames is you're going to need some C-clamps. Now this C-clamp right here is a 2.5 inch clamp. They're a little harder to find at your hardware store. Some may have them. My Home Depot didn't have them, so I ordered these online. They do usually carry a 2 inch and a 4 inch and a 6 inch. But the 2 inch I found, it will work, and so will a 6 inch and a 4 inch. But I liked this size, and I'll put a link in the description below where you can get those if you want a 2.5 inch. But you'll need 4 of them. And you'll also want to gather up your long pins. I like this size. These pins are about 1 3/4 inch long. It doesn't really matter, but I find this is a good length to use. So keep your eye out for these things. Order them if you want, and you'll have them ready for the next tutorial. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial and that you're excited to start making your first quilt. If you like my content, make sure you give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share this with your friends and family, and get ready for the next video in the series, where where I'll show you how you can make your own quilting stands and how to put the fabric on your quilting frames. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the next tutorial.